It's for all of these reasons that on behalf of all of us at Heritage, I'm grateful for each of the panel members who sacrificed a lot of their time and thankfully let us borrow their brain power to put together this report. And I'm particularly proud of all of them, including my Heritage colleagues who are on it. I'll mention them all by name, and we'll give them a rousing round of applause and gratitude at the end. Starting with Representative Mike Waltz, who chaired the panel, Mr. Mike Berry, Lieutenant General Rod Bishop, Ms. Rebecca Heinrichs, Mr. Jeremy Hunt, Mr. Earl Matthews, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, and Ms. Morgan Ortegas. Please give them a heartfelt round of applause. It's my pleasure to introduce to you a friend of Heritage and a personal friend, the chairman of the panel. You all know that Congressman Waltz is the chairman of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Readiness, is a colonel in the National Guard, and a combat decorated Green Beret. He proudly represents North Central Florida, and we know that his experience and service to this nation has made him the perfect fit to chair this panel. It is a great honor to introduce to you a great patriot of our age, Congressman Mike Waltz.
Afternoon, everyone. So thank you, Kevin, for those kind remarks. And I too want to second your appreciation, your thanks to our amazing panel members who took time, to the Heritage Foundation, to the staff, for just everyone involved for organizing this panel. It's such a pivotal time in our national security, in our foreign policy, and in our military. But I've said it, I'll say it again, I particularly wanted to thank the staff that put hours and hours of work and research, and as I'll talk about in a moment, really put some empirical data behind a lot of trends and narratives that a number of us in the national security space have seen, and without them, this wouldn't have been possible. So, as Kevin mentioned, over the last couple of years, we have seen a fundamental shift in our military culture, in the military itself, and in the Defense Department's priorities. And to underscore that, bottom line is rather than focusing on military readiness, on warfighting, and preparing our soldiers to hopefully deter the next war, but if necessary, fight and win it, the Defense Department, in my view, and in view of this report and the panelists, the panelists, the panel members, the Department of Defense has drastically shifted off course. We do face now the most serious and alarming recruiting and retention crisis that we've seen since Vietnam. The Army in particular is losing divisions worth of soldiers that they're not bringing in. And that trend wasn't just a one-year COVID-related episode like we are being told is the case. It's continuing this year. That means it will likely continue to the next because these are cumulative effects. And if we don't arrest this downward trend, I believe the volunteer military could become in the coming years at risk. And that would have all kinds of follow-on consequences. In addition to that, our military has become hyper-focused to its detriment, in my view, on climate initiatives and on other initiatives such as preferred pronouns and eco-friendly tanks rather than lethality. Rather than putting bullets and bombs on enemy soldiers and making them believe that we have the full capability and intent to do so, that demonstration of strength is how we keep the peace. Last I checked, there's no charging stations for electric tanks in Ukraine or in Africa or really anywhere else in the world. And also, last I checked, our enemies aren't worried about how diverse our squadrons are. Never once, as a Green Beret, calling in air support, did any of my Green Berets worry about the sexual orientation of the pilot? Or race, religion, socioeconomic background? I can guarantee you our enemy's bullets and enemy fighter pilots aren't worried about that either. The only thing they're worried about is whether we're American or not, of whether we are capable of defending ourselves and defeating them or not. And that's all our leadership should be worried about as well. These initiatives have taken a real toll on our military and its perception amongst the public. And we're seeing that in data, thanks to the Heritage Foundation and thanks to other organizations that are actually putting some polling data and other types of data behind what we're seeing. So according to the poll carried out by Heritage, 7 in 10 active military members, 68%, have witnessed some or a significant level of politicization within the military, and just as many are gravely concerned about it. This is the real kicker. Just that many are saying because of the politicizing of our military, they would recommend that their children not join. Now, the vast majority of our active duty ranks are made up by the children or family members of our active duty service, now generations on from the draft. And so that's a double hit. That's a retention problem, someone leaving because of politicized military, and then recommending the next generation not join. So this is because of a number of narratives, in my view. One is that the military is overrun with extremists and white supremacy. And when you have the first ever African-American Secretary of Defense, as his first measure as Secretary of Defense, stand down the entire 2.5 million man and woman force, not over training accidents, not over other critical issues like ship maintenance, over the overwhelming problem of extremism in the military, it's not hard to then come to the conclusion that perhaps families of color would not want their children to join a military that's overrun with white supremacy to the point that you have to have a training stand down. Here's the issue. The data doesn't back up our own Secretary of Defense's assertion, because in a study ordered by the Congress, the Pentagon found out that only 100 members out of 2.5 million, for those who aren't great at math, 0.0005%, participated in any form of extremism, Islamic extremism, white supremacy, or what have you. So for 0.0005%, we expended 5 million man hours and tens of millions of dollars and stood down the entire force and created this narrative. And then on the other side, where the recruiting base is in the South and the Midwest, who wants their kid to join a military and be told they're an oppressor or be told that they're privileged? We need to just knock this stuff out and start as leaders talking about the true benefits of service and what you as a citizen can contribute to this nation, and then what you as a citizen can gain from serving this nation. So China continues to plot its replacement, its ascendancy as a global hegemon and replacing the United States as a global leader. Yet this was the first priority of Secretary Austin. My office has received numerous complaints. This is another key point that I want everyone to take away from. We're not making this stuff up. This isn't some kind of Republican election year gotcha talking point. I would much rather be talking about the very real issues facing the readiness of our force right now. But when I have cadets, military members, their families sending me things like pronoun role play at West Point, sending me slides at the Air Force Academy that instructs 18-year-old brand new cadets, very impressionable future leaders of our military, not to say mom and dad, to say parent, not to say boyfriend and girlfriend, to say partner, not to say colorblind. That's offensive. We're not going to ignore that. I have a duty to respond. to those inquiries. So as I've told our military leadership, and we just had Secretary Austin and Milley yesterday before the Armed Services Committee, when I stop getting this stuff from our service members, then we'll stop bringing it up as a matter of course. And secondarily, I asked all of them, and the senior enlisted leaders, the sergeant majors and master chiefs of all the services, they need to ask themselves why these cadets aren't comfortable going to their chain of command. Why do they feel as though they will be canceled or it will hurt their career if they raise their hand and say, hey, I have an issue with this? Why do they have to come to a member of Congress? When I was a cadet at VMI, I would have been petrified to reach out to a member of Congress. So they need to ask themselves, as a matter of an open door policy and command climate, why this stuff isn't being presented to them. I want to talk about one other incredibly important thing that this report addresses. We were able to, in legislation last year, stop the vaccine mandate. I want to be clear. This isn't some type of anti-vaccine initiative, but when the vaccine clearly showed itself that to not stop the spread, when you have a Secretary of Defense who's been boosted 4 times and yet still gets COVID, I mean, look, initially, of course, we don't want soldiers getting into tanks or submarines and infecting the rest of the crew, but when it became evident that you're going to infect the rest of the crew anyway, regardless of whether you're vaccinated or not, then that becomes a personal health decision. And, oh, by the way, then as a matter of readiness, you have the most healthy, according to the data, the least affected portion of our population. Yet, despite the recruiting crisis, the military was on the verge of discharging another 20,000 on top of the 8,000 that it had already discharged. So we have some recommendations in this report. We address it. We need to restore those that still want to serve. We asked Secretary Austin directly yesterday in the committee of whether he's actually reaching out to those folks. The Pentagon is not. I find that just incredibly short-sighted and almost ideological. These were people that were signed up, trained, at enormous cost to the taxpayer, have key skills that we desperately need. We should be doing everything we can to invite them back in to serve again. Just a few other points in what is recommended in this very good report, and I would point everyone to the polling data and the other data that is that's in the back of the report. One of the issues that I have with our recruiting and retention crisis is we really don't have a lot of good data. And the only service that has demonstrated any, the Army, was reluctant to release it. I see why when they did release it, because I just don't think the survey that they are issuing to recruits is really very fulsome. So I would point everyone to that. The recommendations here point to a couple of things. A priority should be to eliminate the entire DEI construct within the DoD. Offices and staffs were formally, appropriately, titled as equal opportunity and equal employment opportunity offices. That should be restored. We should have a full audit of the complete scope of the current DEI bureaucracy within the DoD, including all staff programs and funding. We should bar the use of appropriated dollars to fund race-conscious selections, assignments, accessions, or promotions. We have to return our military to being the greatest meritocracy in the world. We should prohibit the instruction and propagation of these divisive teachings such as CRT, even though that is often, they're not labeled that way, the concepts of which are infused in various other teachings. We should pass a sense of the Congress that the military should provide equal opportunity for all members. Of course, we absolutely should. And before funds are appropriated to Defense Department environmental projects and efforts, a report accompanied by the cost-benefit analysis should be submitted, affirming that the proposed policies or programs will improve warfighting capabilities, which should always be the first priority. These are common sense recommendations. They really are. Our national defense policies should not be partisan. We share a common interest as Americans in defending and protecting our citizens. And in my humble opinion, the #1 job of the federal government is to keep the nation safe. And in this modern era, to maintain the United States and the West's leadership role across the globe. We must, as we face unprecedented threats, a China that is eclipsing us in key areas, a Russia that has started the most significant land war and the most deadly conflict since World War II, Iran that's on the cusp of having a nuclear weapon, North Korea that already does and is fully operationalizing it. And oh, by the way, global terrorism didn't get the memo that the war on terror is over because the White House wanted it to be. It is still incredibly dangerous and can threaten us and hit us at any moment. With all of these things ongoing, we can and we will do all we can to codify these recommendations in legislation. We are working towards that end, and you have my commitment that I'm going to run through brick walls till we get it done. All right, thank you so much. Hey, man. Thanks so much for your work on this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Congress. I think I speak for everyone when I say I'm just thankful for you leading this fight in the halls of Congress, and our nation is better off because of you. So thank you, Congressman.
Brother.
Appreciate
We're
that.
sitting here?
Yep, we're gonna go ahead and sit here. I'm Jeremy Hunt. I'm the chairman of Veterans on Duty, and I had the honor of serving on this panel with just some extraordinary leaders. As we were kind of going through all the research and putting all this information in a report for you. So we're going to transition now to our panel discussion part of the event, and I'm going to invite some of my colleagues on stage with me. First, we have Rebecca Heinrichs, who's a senior fellow at Hudson Institute, as well as Mike Berry, who is the director for military initiatives at First Liberty Institute. Awesome.
Work on this, Mike. Yeah, appreciate it. I went a little too long, guys. Sorry. Go fired up. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to kind of start off. We're gonna start off with having some questions going through the report, and then if anyone in the audience has questions, you're welcome to ask those as well towards the conclusion of the event. And even if you're watching online, you can also get your questions ready. We want to hear from you as well. But to kind of kick things off, I wanted to talk. You brought up critical race theory towards the end of your remarks. One thing I love about our report is that we're very specific in what we talked about in this. We didn't speak in generalities. We tried to make it as clear cut and close to details as possible. And one discussion I liked is how we kind of went through about why critical race theory is so contrary to the core principles of the military and why it is so harmful. So I wanted to kind of first start off there. I'll start with you, Rebecca, just kind of working our way down on what is it about critical race theory that we felt the need to talk about that in the report and make it such a serious issue?
Well, first of all, thank you all for being here, and of course, thank you to my fellow panelists. The reason that I thought that this report was so important was because I spend a lot of time paying attention to the threats facing the country, and so the United States we're already on our back foot, and there's a lot of work we got to do, and what's going on in our military right now is incredibly serious. The congressman laid out all the different problems with it, but for me, I find it alarming that a lot of our senior military leadership denied that this was going on when we can see it. There's overwhelming anecdotal evidence that all of us have heard from, but then you also can just see statistically what's going on. And I've long been tracking the critical race theory and how it's really anathema to the American idea fundamentally. Because critical race theory is really it's a hermeneutical tool, meaning it's a learning system of how you make sense of the world. That's what it is, and it holds to ideas that are again fundamentally anathema to the American idea, but then would be especially deadly in a military environment because it holds to ideas of identity essentialism, racial essentialism, gender essentialism. This is central to who a person is, and then it divides you up based on this sort of system of oppression, and which of course is really, it turns the idea of equal opportunity. Everybody sort of, everybody born equally and of equal dignity and worth before the Creator, and then based on your own work ethic and your own determination that you can make something of yourself, and that gets the Congressman's point about meritocracy. And so to have CRT, it's bad enough that you have CRT really pervading businesses, but to have it actually pervade the Department of Defense, it's deadly. It means you have to lower standards in order to have equitable outcome rather than equality of opportunity. Because you have to lower the standards for women if you want as many women to qualify for the same kind of jobs and billets that the men have. You have to. So anyway, so that would be my short little medium answer, I guess, I'd say, on that. It's a huge question. It's very complex, and that's why it's so frustrating when it comes to policy making, because it's very academic and philosophical, and it's like sometimes it's very challenging to pin some of these guys on what's going on. But that is really the heart of the problem.
Yeah, if I could just dive in, and I want to make a distinction. This is the distinction. We all remember, General Milley's kind of blow up at the hearing a few years ago. That was actually in response to my questions to Secretary Austin about CRT in the military. And I have no issue, zero, encourage. We should have a wide-eyed view of history and the very checkered, discriminatory past that this country has. And oh, by the way, our efforts to continue to move forward towards full equal opportunity for all Americans. Of course we want our military to be diverse. Of course we want it to be inclusive. But it's the equity portion that is so dangerous when you have a standards-based military. If you start eliminating standards to be a pilot or to be a doctor, and I don't know how with elite units you have equitable outcomes. At the end of the day, in the military in particular, you have to have the best of the best. So we have to make that distinction. It often gets conflated in this debate between a clear-eyed view of our history versus how we move forward as a country and how we maintain a meritocracy as a military. And that's an incredibly important distinction to make.
Absolutely.
Mike, good.
I would just add that, to me, the root problem with critical race theory is that it often devolves into teaching that America is somehow inherently evil or flawed. And certainly we have our flaws, as the Congressman pointed out. We don't need to run or hide from those flaws, but to emphasize them and to create our entire identity as a nation around them, I think is very counterproductive to the role of the military, which is to fight and to deter wars. And instead, I think that to replace critical race theory, we should have what we should be teaching young Americans and our service members as well is the things that make America great, right? The things, the concepts, the ideas around which we can unify, the notion of e pluribus unum, right? From many, one. And instead, CRT essentially inverts that, right? And it says from one, we are many. And I think when you ask many, certainly not all, but when you ask many service members, what motivates you to serve? Why do you serve? And for a lot of them, I'll speak for myself, it was the notion of this notion of duty, right? Of I have an obligation to give back to this country because it has given me and my family so much, and I love my country, and in fact, I'm willing to put my life on the line for this country. And now we're in an era in which our young people are being told America's not worth sacrificing for. America's not worth serving. America's not worth risking your life for. And then we sit and scratch our leadership scratches its collective heads and says, why are people not willing to join and sign up? Well, because you've just spent the last 12 years, 15 years of their lives telling them how awful this place is.
Yeah, and just final point, I know you want to get on to Midi-Bor, but I think it has real implications for civilian oversight of the military as well when you're telling and teaching at a fundamental time in their lives, are future military leaders, that the civilian institutions overseeing the military are fundamentally racist, misogynist, colonialist, and really bad institutions systemically. Not that the people within them have flaws, but that systemically they are bad. It's pretty tough to then ask someone to follow orders and go die for it.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's also too, just for the military as a whole, if we have this over focus on our differences and what separates me from you, and that really kind of destroys the cohesion of the team. I mean, we need to be focused on our commonality, on a common purpose, fighting and winning our nation's wars. And so if we get too distracted by all of these types of individual identities in the military, it's just not the place for
I had
it.
a World War II veteran who I was close to, since passed on, in Jacksonville, Florida, coming from the segregated South, and never really had any kind of meaningful relationship with a person of color. Just wasn't allowed. His rounds the corner in his first ship in the Navy, 19 years old, and his bunkmate was black. And they ended up becoming lifelong friends. They ended up, because of that forcing function of service, figuring out all the things that they had in common, right? And having a much deeper understanding, rather than walking in the door and being told how different they were. And I feel strongly we need to get back to that mentality.
One more point on this too. It really is, this came up in our discussions when we were writing this, is it really is creating factions in the military.
That's right.
Which is just, when you go through all the training, you are trying to create this unit cohesion out of many one. And so by actually having this idea of, again, of these gender sort of essentialism, you are actually creating factions that otherwise maybe weren't there, or that you actually should be trying to smooth over for the purposes of creating the most successful military in the world.
That's exactly right. And it's also amazing to me how before we had equal opportunity programs, and what diversity meant something entirely different when many of us were serving. I mean, even just myself in the last few years, it's entirely changed. And now that whole program has now been replaced with this new DEI bureaucracy, and they've redefined what much of that means. Of course, we want a military where everyone serves free of discrimination and has equal opportunity. But that kind of moral imperative, the DEI bureaucracy has stretched that far beyond that now. Now we're going to try to assure outcomes, and then that's the danger there. But of course, if you ask certain folks some of your colleagues on the Hill, they'll just tell you, oh, well, just Republicans just don't like diversity. This is not even true. It's just that the problem is how they're trying to go about it, and the type of progressive political ideas that they're lacing in some of the training that's going on now. I'm going to try to move on to the second question. I think we're going to get through like maybe 3 questions now. Okay, but so the second question, we in our report we talked about some of the new standards the DoD is now kind of instituting to reportedly level the playing field. The DoD, for example, has now decided to discard its gender-neutral fitness test and has looked at these different kind of ways of making sure that that they are supposedly leveling the playing field by changing certain standards. I want to talk about that and kind of why is that harmful to military readiness, and kind of what are the issues that you see if we kind of let this practice go on?
One small point of correction, but it's a point of pride. The Army didn't decide to go back to a gender-neutral physical standard. My amendment in the last defense bill told them to in law. But this is an important point. Let's make physical standards according to what the job needs.
Yes.
Very different physical standards to be an artilleryman or woman, or to be an infantryman or woman, than it is to be a cyber warrior or to be a cook. And so, one of the justifications for having this bifurcation was that, well, we'll dissuade women from some of these, by having these tougher standards. Let's make it according to the job. This is about standards, not race, religion, socioeconomic background, what religion you are, or whatever. It's the standards to do the job, and the jobs are different. They require different things. Now, we'll see how they implement it. So, one of the things I've learned in Washington is it's incredibly hard to pass a law, and then it's even harder to get the executive branch to follow the law. But that's where the oversight function will come in. And look, at the end of the day, you can't have I actually had a number of Democrats vote with me on this one, because I think it undermines the achievement of women in combat arms since we've opened the combat arms. You can't have a woman go through Navy SEAL training, Ranger School, Special Forces training, where the standards are incredibly difficult and high, but then send her to lead an infantry unit and say, well, you have a lower standard than your soldiers that you're leading, as though the artillery round is lighter for women than it is for men. It's just, it's nonsensical. And so we'll see if they get to that rationalized, kind of standard that we did get into law, and it's going to force some change.
Absolutely, and thank you for leading the fight with that and getting things done. Anybody else want to add on that?
No, I mean, I would just say on this too, I mean, this was actually, I'm glad you brought this one up on page 21 of the report. It talks about the different lowering of standards. And it's kind of amazing how we as a country have gotten so, I think, kind of, not used to, it's not the right word, but you really kind of have to object to their fundamental assumptions here. I mean, I watched the hearing in the Senate Armed Services Committee with the Secretary of the Army on this, and she acted sort of confused by the questioning. It's like she didn't even understand what the problem was. Lowering the physical fitness standards in order to make sure that women can have the same kind of jobs. I mean, you look at this, when the Army lowered the minimum standard for the 2-mile run to a dawdling 21 minutes, I think that was I think I did that when I was pregnant.
Rebecca, and you know what? Democrat Senator Tammy Duckworth, who lost both her legs in combat, said, I could run that faster than and supported Tom Cotton, and he put it on the Senate side, and I put it on the House side. Yeah.
I mean, and this gets back to, so when I see something like that, and I find it's astounding to me. Frankly, it's offensive. But it also gets back to something that is much harder to quantify, but I think is so important. And this gets back to the sort of, we mentioned it several times in the report. You want to have a military with a strong warrior ethos. Mm-hmm. And if you are doing things, if you look at that, you look at the 18, 19-year-old folks who are coming in here and trying to meet these standards, and you see these people who can't possibly meet these standards, but you lower the whole thing, it's demoralizing. It is demoralizing. And so, yes, you have like the no kidding, it's going to hurt your entire, this great quote here, the presence of just a handful of individuals who cannot run 2 miles faster than 21 minutes has the potential to derail a training exercise, not to mention actual combat patrol. Of course. It's also just demoralizing for the entire military. Who are the kind of people you're trying to draw into the military? They want to do something hard, important, selfless, something for their country. They love this country. And so I think that if you water it down and make it something so that you take away something of what is hard and frankly exclusive about the warriors who join the military, I think that obviously is going to have an impact on recruitment.
Absolutely. Mike, the next question I want to go to you on this. I want to transition to talk a little bit about the COVID-19 vaccine, because we dealt with this in the report as well, and it was one of the more controversial sections because there are different views on this, even within some of us who see the world in much of the same way. The 2023 NDAA, thanks to a lot of the work that the Congressman did, eliminated the requirement for the vaccine mandate for our service members. But there are still a lot of lingering impacts of the vaccine mandate. I know you've done just a ton of research into this, Mike. I wanted to kind of hear from you about the kind of what those lingering impacts are, and also kind of what's still happening, and kind of bring us up to date on the issue.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with a caveat and a disclaimer. So the caveat is that I think it's safe to say that we as a panel took no official position on whether DoD should have issued a vaccine mandate in the first place, or we're certainly not a medical panel, so we didn't really take a position on the medical efficacy of the vaccine, or which vaccines were more effective or not effective. And then my disclaimer is that I'm one of the attorneys representing the Navy SEALs who challenged the Navy and their vaccine mandate. But I think what we've discovered through the course of the Navy SEAL litigation, and also a number of the other cases around the country that arose as a result, is really two factors. One, we have an all-volunteer force, all right, and that's throughout world history. A nation the size of the United States, with as much territory that we have to defend, that's actually a relatively rare thing, right? To have a military, a standing force that is all volunteer, where we don't use conscription. In order to have an all-volunteer force, it requires people to have, in the military we use the phrase special trust and confidence, right? You have to, and that's a two-way street. There has to be trust and confidence between the commander and the subordinates. And when that trust is lost, when the commander does something that the subordinates think that he's either going to get us killed or she is incapable of leading us to a successful mission accomplishment, you lose that trust. And it's almost impossible, right? Congressman, I'm sure you can, it's almost impossible to get it back once it's lost. Right? And so it's not just the fact that there was a vaccine mandate that destroyed that bond of trust. It's the manner in which it was administered and enforced. That's what's causing the erosion here. And in the context of recruiting and retention, here's how that plays out. All right, that you have thousands, tens of thousands of service members who, in this era, right? We always talk about this thing of like the low information voter. Well, the newsflash is that our service members are high information service members. They're probably more plugged in and connected with what's going on than probably at any other time in our history. And so they know, they have very good, we call it the Lance Corporal Underground in the Marine Corps. And so information travels very quickly. And when they begin hearing that, well, wait a minute, this vaccine is not FDA approved, it's only available under an emergency use authorization, and according to 10 U.S.C. 1107A, the Secretary of Defense actually has to submit a written request to the President for an affirmative waiver of informed consent in order to make a vaccine mandatory, right? I'm not trying to get down in the weeds, I'm just saying these are the type of chatter that our service members are having with each other. And they say, okay, and then they ask, well, what happens if I have a religious objection to this vaccine because of the asserted or purported link to aborted fetal cells, or because of some other reason, so on and so forth. And then when they submit those religious accommodation requests, or even ask the question to their commands, what rights do I have, right, as a service member, as a person of faith, to object to this? And the commander says, you have to get the vaccine or else. Right? It's a direct order. That is a direct order. You get the vaccine, or in some cases they were threatened with court-martial. In other cases they were involuntarily separated. And then in the very next breath they see that there are medical exemptions available. There are administrative exemptions available. People ask, what's an administrative exemption? If you are less than 6 months away from separation or retirement, they wave a magic wand and say you don't have to get the vaccine. And service members, again, they're paying close attention because they're high information, and they say, well, the DoD, Secretary of Defense, is telling me the reason why this mandate, this vaccine is necessary is to protect the force, right? That this is a highly transmittable disease that can cause death or serious bodily harm, and we can't have any exceptions. And they say, but the guy who still has 6 months left on the clock, somehow he magically can't get COVID. Or the person who's participating in a clinical trial in which they're receiving a placebo is magically unable to contract COVID. And so they say, well, there's a disconnect there. I'm not being told the truth. Either my commander and leadership is not telling me the truth, or they're completely incompetent and they themselves don't know the truth. And then when they submit the religious accommodation request, the service member who has the medical waiver or the administrative waiver is treated as if there's absolutely no issues at all, right? And then the person who has the religious accommodation is forced out, is put into what we say, they're told to go sit in the corner and color. And that's the breakdown of trust and confidence, because they now immediately sense the disparity between how they're treated. And one group, and we heard the Secretary of the Navy himself say, I believe he said in response to the NDAA, all this is going to do is create two classes of service member, the vaccinated class and the unvaccinated class. He's telling the American people, telling Congress to their faces, we're going to begin segregating based on this. And when service members hear that, right, remember I said at the beginning, it's an all-volunteer force. For recruiting and retention, and an all-volunteer force, the military has to present an appealing option to people, mostly to 18 to 24-year-olds, to say serving in the military is a better and more attractive option than whatever else is out there, college, vocation, etc. And people in that age, the 18 to 24-year-old age, are saying, thanks, but no thanks. I'm not interested because I don't know if I can trust you. Or if they're already serving and their period of enlistment is coming up to an end, the military has an option at least to say, we would like you to stay in. We think military service is a better option for you than whatever else is out there. And they say, thanks, but no thanks. I don't trust you anymore. I don't want to be a part of this anymore.
If I can pop in real quick. Oh, Congressman, were you going to?
No, I'm good.
I was going to say, just take everything he just said, and then you pile on top of that on page 21 of the report, and the administration chose not to contest a court ruling allowing service members who are HIV positive to serve in combat zones, overturning years of rational health policy in favor of inclusiveness. So, I mean, you can see the reason that the COVID issue was separate for this, where we got the panelists to agree to, because obviously you want service members to be vaccinated and safe for the force, is because of the political nature of the way it was carried out.
That's right. And that's a perfect point to talk about now, because our Department of Defense has gotten more and more over-politicized. And we've talked about this, especially in the context of the military recruitment crisis. And as many of you know, the Army, just at the end of the last fiscal year, came up 15,000 soldiers short of its recruiting goal. This is the worst crisis we've been in since the advent of the all-volunteer force. And our report, a lot of us are focusing on a lot of the issues that have led to that are just this over-politicization of the military. Just a couple of days ago, I had an honor of testifying before the House Oversight Subcommittee on National Security, the Border, and Foreign Affairs about this issue. And one of your Democrat colleagues asked me, he said, well, what do you mean there's this politicization? And one of the best examples is our Department of Defense Secretary this last summer making this public statement at the overturning of Roe v. Wade, saying that the Department of Defense is going to now fund service members to travel to other states to seek abortions. And not only that, we're actually going to give you 3 weeks of paid vacation if you are seeking abortion. So he shoved the Department of Defense into one of the most polarizing political issues of our time. And many of us who have a very different view on that issue than the defense secretary thought that was extremely offensive and extremely an act that would politicize an organization that must stay apolitical in order to carry out its mission. And so we talked a lot about some of these instances of over-politicization and how it impacts recruitment. And I want to cue the slides because we even conducted a poll talking about some of how it ends up affecting recruitment over time and how the American public sees the Department of Defense is becoming overly politicized. I wanted to go, Congressman, to hear your thoughts on this, and then we're going to turn over to some of the audience questions next.
Well, I mean, I just mentioned it in my remarks. I think you've got a retention crisis and a recruiting crisis, and when you have our military about 60 to 70% staffed by military families, then it's a double hit. And just quick point on the numbers. The Army fell short 15,000, but when they saw what was coming, they lowered their goals by 10. So it was actually 25,000. So far, we think they're short about 10,000 this year. So we're still trending in the absolute wrong direction by huge numbers. And so even if you right the ship, you're looking at 5 to 10 years to make up those numbers. And then on the retention side, it's critical skills, like cyber, like pilots, like physicians, that we've invested years and millions of dollars into as a military and as a society. So it truly is detrimental. It truly is a crisis. And at some point, we can't just the military can't just keep lowering its end strength goals. At some point, we're going to have a huge red flag, red star cluster that says we can't meet mission, and then what? Yeah. And the options aren't good. But I'm just really thrilled to see some actual data. Again, I asked every one of the senior enlisted leaders for all of the services to present us what data they have around the recruiting retention crisis. Only the Army, at least at that hearing, says they have any, and then we had to fight with them to get access to it.
Amazing.
And it of course probably won't surprise you, paints a very different picture than what Heritage's very good poll. And again, I would point members of the media to the actual methodology behind the polling. I think it's solid. It's very good.
We got a 50-page climate change report and a whole strategy, but very little information from the Department of Defense about what they're going to do to combat the recruitment crisis.
You got it.
Want to turn to audience questions. If there's anyone who wants to ask a specific question, we'll go to the gentleman in the back here first. For anybody on the panel here.
Well, thank you all for your contribution to the report, and thank you for being here today. I wondered if it's in the purview of the report or I wonder if it's in the purview of the report or in your individual interests to contrast what's going on in our Department of Defense with the Chinese or Russian or other militaries. I've seen some well-done propaganda videos, recruitment videos coming out of those respective countries. Have any of you been aware of any reports or intelligence on what's going on in those respective militaries, comparing and contrasting with what is happening in our own?
Sure. I'll take that. I haven't seen any reports on that, but I'm so grateful for your question because I think that this is a critically important point, and I would lose sleep tonight if I didn't get a chance to make this point. Our adversaries are seizing on this. So their propaganda videos, I mean, they know exactly kind of what's going on in this country, and so it's propaganda. So they're creating propaganda videos that show that they're anti-woke and that we're woke and that our military is weak and that they are strong. I do want to make the foot stomp this point, so if this point is not lost at all. The United States military is still the best military in the world. Right. Okay, so we are targeting a solvable problem. And so, I mean, if I get briefings all the time, and I interact with the military and work at the Pentagon all the time, and I would still take our junior officers to our adversaries' senior officers any day of the week. And so what we're trying to do is save the military from a pernicious ideology that can have a very negative effect on our warfighting capability. And so that's the purpose of this report. So appreciate the question, but I think our adversaries are just, they're playing on this, and they know how to press our buttons to try to make the point that you just made.
We've seen propaganda on the withdrawal from Afghanistan, demonstrating and furthering the narrative that the West is in decline, that democracy is too fractious, that capitalism is inherently unfair, right? So, and that now the United States, and I've heard this actually from ambassadors of allied nations, that jihad won and the West lost. We've seen it with the Chinese spy balloon incident, further evidence that we're too weak and fractious to lead. But when you see it blasted at our allies in the Philippines, Taiwan, and when you see it in jihadi sites all over, then yeah, it's absolutely being used against us. And to Rebecca's point on this being a solvable problem, absolutely. We have the most kick-ass military in the world, but we need to have our adversaries believe that, and our allies believe that, and our prospective recruits believe that. So it's not, because we constantly get back from the Pentagon, look, this was, the Air Force Academy orientation. That was 2 hours out of all this other type of training that we get. But you're planting seeds with very young leaders on that piece. And then from a procurement standpoint, the M1 Abrams tank, just take that as one example, has been with us now for 40 years. And so if you're starting to put the wheels in motion for electrified fighting vehicles, I mean, everybody kind of laughs and shakes their head, but yet we're now seeing research and development dollars being put down that road. You go to the Association of the U.S. Army, to their huge trade show, and industry's responding, right? And starting to devote, because they're responding to what the Pentagon's telling them to respond. So once these massive long-term 30, 40-year procurement programs get steamrolling, then before you know it, it's too big to fail. We don't have anything else. We have to keep pouring good money after bad. And when the entire premise is to have a less carbon-emitting vehicle rather than the most lethal, then that's why, to Rebecca's point, we have to nip this stuff in the bud, and we've got to do it sooner than later.
Any others? All right. So
Well, I
these
was
are
going
my
to say just
town halls.
no, that was great.
Yeah.
One more point on that too. I mean, just real quick. It's also just an opportunity. It's actually, it costs us. I mean, we go through and give the examples that have already been in other reports of the military spending time on this. You know, whenever our senior military says it's only 2 hours here, it was just this orientation here. It's planting seeds. It's also diverting their attention on something that is divisive. But then they're not reading books on how to deter and fight and win the Chinese. They're not studying what would make the United States successful against our adversaries. There's a real, I mean, when you see these correlations between the accidents in the military with what's going on with the kinds of attention that these folks are spending their time and attention with other things unrelated to keeping ships operating well and aircraft, you begin to wonder. Mm-hmm. So that's the other point. It's a real cost. It's a real no kidding cost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just a quick add-on. For those who doubt the value of strategic propaganda, yesterday was the 50th anniversary of the pullout of our last combat troops from Vietnam. So it's been 50 years. I'm actually taking a course, a war college level course right now on the Vietnam conflict. And one of the things that was really impressed upon me in that course is this, in the early 70s, 70, 71, 72, towards the very, very last days of the U.S. involvement in Vietnam, we were inflicting heavy military casualties upon the North Vietnamese who were supported by China and Russia. And we were militarily, we held the upper hand to a significant degree. But through propaganda, and especially the way that they were targeting the Nixon administration at that time, they held the upper hand on the propaganda side. So the American people actually believed that we were losing, right? And it was withering the American people's resolve. And once you lose the will to fight, I don't care how great your technology is, the will to fight is the key. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think is the key problem here with CRT and these other DEI initiatives, is it's eroding our will to fight. Yeah. Very much like we said at the beginning, right? Why would you want to sign up and fight for something that you've been taught is bad?
Yeah, exactly right. Go to one question here. Yes. Bring the mic over.
Dr. Myrtle Alexander, Institute for Academic Management. My question is,
I'm sorry.
Dr. Myrtle Alexander, Institute for Academic Management. My question is, have these initiatives and practices also infiltrated our JROTC and ROTC in the academic world? And is there a fear that it will come down to that for our students?
It's already there.
Yeah.
And we know it's certainly at our service academies, which is where we're at my alma mater at West Point. They're teaching, they're giving lectures on whiteness and giving all this extra, politicized, progressive talking points. The Air Force Academy, they now have cadet DEI officials going around writing up their classmates. We had a word for the kind of people like that, that would write up their classmates when I was there. I won't repeat it here. But
that term is still in existence.
It's gotten absolutely outrageous. And on the JROTC point, I'm thankful it was JROTC that got me interested in the military. And I had two ROTC instructors who told me, who happened to be black, and they said, look, you are going to get into the academy based on merit. And they worked out with me every day to get me into physical shape. And that's what we're standing to lose when a lot of young Americans don't have that anymore.
Can I draw attention to this? Page 20 of the report, just to put even more meat in the bones here. Right after January 6th, when Secretary Austin had this, the stand down here, in the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute, that's a DoD school and research laboratory focused on supporting readiness, they published a student guide entitled Extremism. In it, it says, nowadays, this is a quote, nowadays, instead of dressing in sheets or publicly espousing hate messages, many extremists will talk of individual liberties, states' rights, and how to make the world a better place. I got news for you. Don't tell them about the Heritage Foundation and the Hudson Institute, and the U.S. Congress, for that matter. So, these are things that, and one I appreciated so much about how we were able to get this report together, and how hard the staff worked at doing drafts and drafts and drafts for the panelists, is we pointed to what is actually there, so that these senior officers can't say it doesn't exist. It is in the documents that you're writing and that you're pushing upon the troops.
Just one quick point on junior OTC. The services have repeatedly, because I'm a separate conversation, but an advocate of getting us back to national service. Doesn't have to be in uniform, all kinds of ways to serve, and providing educational benefits in exchange for service rather than just throwing them out there for free. But the services have repeatedly come back and told us there's no correlation between students who participate in junior ROTC and then join the military, that it actually doesn't help recruiting. They can't show me the data. They can't show me the lack of correlation, but they just keep resisting my efforts. And now I've had some great conversations with Roger Wicker over in the Senate to expand junior ROTC. And look, we have to get back to a service-oriented mindset to each other, to our neighbors, to our country, and you get all of the other benefits of leadership, discipline, followership, teamwork, and doing it with people who don't look like you. You know, may not come from the same background. Yes, we have yet a follow. Oh, sorry, but
I was just going to put a finer point on that. So, most of us have probably by now heard about the race discriminatory admissions cases that went up before the Supreme Court. There were oral argument just a few months ago. The Solicitor General of the United States, so that's the attorney that represents and speaks on behalf of the United States, was offered a portion of the argument time. And in her argument, she could have talked about anything in defending these racially discriminatory preference policies at schools like University of North Carolina and Harvard and elsewhere. And she decided to use her time in front of the U.S. Supreme Court to talk about how ROTC. And she said that we must have racially discriminatory admissions policies because of ROTC, and that without them, without these equity-based policies, ROTC will suffer. And she actually even went so far as to say that because diversity and DEI initiatives are a matter of national security, less than 1 week.
Go ahead.
I was going to say less than 1 week apart from that oral argument, there was a hearing right here in Washington, D.C. at the Court of Appeals in a different case involving a U.S. Marine who was a member of the Sikh faith, who wanted to be able to be in the Marines while maintaining his articles of faith as a member of the Sikh faith. And the Marine Corps, the Department of Justice attorney in that case, who argued on behalf of the Marine Corps that this Marine should not be able to have his articles of faith, his argument was, we need uniformity. Everybody has to look the same. We can't allow anybody to look different for the sake of national security. And so I go back to my earlier comment that when service members hear that, their heads explode and they say, they're talking to us out of both sides of their mouth, and we don't know who to believe.
Can I just add to that, too? There is I keep going back to actual data, science, aside from the narratives.
Trust the
and
science.
we can't get the services to show us any correlation between a more or less diverse unit and one that is more or less lethal or ready for combat. It's a narrative. Of course, we want diversity of thought and approach and what have you, but they can't point to actual percentages that then make an infantry unit, a squadron
unit in American history zero diversity. Yeah, because they were 100% Japanese American.
And it's actually not diversity of thought that they want. It's not diversity of thought that they want. It's actually propaganda for uniformity of thought. And that's what they're indoctrinating, which is exactly what you don't want. They've got, to your point, the diversity question completely on its head.
Yeah. Well, you can see why we enjoyed making this report, being able to work with people like the folks sitting on the stage with me. It was an honor serving with all of you. And I thank everyone for participating in this event, and those watching online. We really appreciate your interest in this topic. We're going to keep fighting on this. We thank you to the congressmen, to other leaders all here who are leading the fight to make sure our military gets back to what it's intended to do, to fight and win our nation's wars. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I got to go catch a flight.